In Canada, 83 churches have been burned down or vandalized since 2021, and the reason why this is happening is absolutely shocking, because there is something that the mainstream media is hiding from us.
But all of a sudden, Canada looks a lot like the Soviet Union. Seem like we're exaggerating a little bit? Well, they're burning Catholic and Anglican churches in recent days.
In May of 2021, a native Canadian tribe announced the discovery of 215 unmarked graves of Indigenous children at the site of a former residential school in Kamloops, British Columbia. Before we continue, what are residential schools? Well, residential schools were institutions run by the Canadian government and churches from the late 19th century to the late 20th century, where more than 150,000 Indigenous children were forcibly taken from their families and communities for the purpose of assimilation. We don't know for certain the exact conditions at these schools, but undoubtedly there was at least some degree of abuse and neglect, as well as many children who suffered from illnesses that were introduced to them. The announcement of the Kamloops graves sparked a national outcry and a wave of investigations at other residential school sites across Canada. Since then, several other First Nations have reported finding hundreds of unmarked graves at former schools in Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and Ontario. The total of graves found so far is estimated to be over 1,000, and some say there could be thousands more yet to be uncovered. The mainstream media reported on the supposed discovery of these unmarked graves without questioning any of the assertions being made. Here's a report from Bloomberg.
We started our radar penetrating research on June the 2nd of 2021. As of yesterday, we have hit 751 unmarked graves. This is not a mass grave site. These are unmarked graves. This is now today on Cowes' First Nation, and this is what we call today our community grave site. It became our community grave site after the 1970s, when the residential school was stopped, overseen by the Roman Catholic Church and the Archdiocese. You're going to notice that they are in proper order. These that lay here are 1 meter by 1 meter apart in some cases.
And here's another report from WION, which has over 7 million subscribers on YouTube.
Now to Canada, where horrors from a different era have returned to haunt the country. Another mass grave of children has been unearthed. School children. And this is the third one since May. 182 unmarked graves have been found in British Columbia. More than 1,000 mass graves have been found in Canada.
The supposed discovery of these unmarked graves has sparked conversations and questions about Canada's history and identity, and how to reckon with its legacy of colonialism and genocide. Many Indigenous groups and allies have called for canceling or modifying Canada Day, the national celebration on July 1st, to honor the victims and survivors of residential schools and to demand justice and reconciliation. All of this has predictably triggered a backlash against the Catholic Church, which operated much of the residential schools and has been accused of withholding records and refusing to apologize for its role in the system. As a result, many have directed their grief and anger at the Catholic churches, especially those located on First Nations territories. As we mentioned earlier, so far, 83 churches have been burned down or vandalized since the first report on unmarked graves. One would think that burning down churches would be seen as a horrendous act that would be condemned by everyone. But shockingly, in Western cultures where Christianity is more and more seen as the enemy, acts of persecution against Christians is oftentimes minimalized and sometimes even celebrated. Here is Prime Minister Justin Trudeau calling the attacks against Christians understandable.
As I've also said, it is unacceptable and wrong that acts of vandalism and arson are being seen across the country, including against Catholic churches. One of my reflections is I understand the anger that's out there against the federal government, against institutions like the Catholic Church. It is real, and it is fully understandable given the shameful history that we're all becoming more and more aware of and engaging ourselves to do better as Canadians. But I can't help but think that burning down churches is actually depriving people who are in need of grieving and healing and mourning from places where they can actually grieve and reflect and look for support. We shouldn't be lashing out at buildings that can provide solace to some of our fellow citizens.
Even while churches are being burned down, Trudeau can't help but essentially blame Christians for the persecution they are suffering, instead of unequivocally saying that it is wrong and evil to target a particular group of people for things that happened in the past. He describes the church burnings with the despicable word understandable. The Vatican, which is seen as a global moral authority, also seemed to falter in its response. Pope Francis's immediate expression of profound sorrow for the alleged mass graves without waiting for a comprehensive inquiry unwittingly bolstered the unverified reports. For many, his reaction was less about compassion and more about reinforcing a narrative even before its veracity was established.
It is a pilgrimage of penance. On a rare overseas trip, an aging pontiff hoping to right a historic wrong. Thousands of Indigenous people in Canada gathered on these sacred grounds.
The words you share with us will echo the true healing and real hope throughout many generations to come.
Many emotional, waiting for an apology more than 100 years in the making.
Many on the left even celebrated and encouraged the attacks upon Christians.
Harsha Walia, the executive director of the British Columbia Civil Liberties Association, which is basically Canada's version of the ACLU, encouraged the vandals. She declared, quote, "Burn it all down."
However, the mainstream media has been hiding a very, very important piece of information, despite many media headlines that seemed to suggest that actual human remains have been found at these supposed grave sites. No actual human remains have yet to be found. What has actually been found are not human remains, but rather anomalies detected by ground-penetrating radar. The people who detected these anomalies are merely guessing that these anomalies are unmarked graves, despite no human remains being found so far. Watch this man from the First Nations tribe express, it seems with disappointment, that when they excavated a site where they expected to find human remains, they found nothing.
July 24th would be the start of our continuing search for truth as we move from identifying 14 reflections in the ground underneath the Catholic Church to an actual excavation of the site. Our elders, residential school survivors, and community members requested that we move in this direction together following community engagement over the past 2 years. The excavation would be an effort to determine the truth of the reflections identified by ground-penetrating radar that was done twice over this location in the past 12 months to lead to greater certainty of the extent and location of the reflections. We are now concluding the excavation of the 14 locations under the church. The archaeological team we hired from the University of Brandon, which is the same archaeological team that is relied upon by regional police agencies when doing archaeological excavations, found no conclusive evidence of human remains in their excavation of the ground under the church basement. As a community, we were preparing for more than one possible outcome, which meant that we would prepare for the worst, but we would hope for the best. We know from the living memory of our elders who attended the school, as well as the living memory of those who have been passed the stories of their ancestors' experiences in the school, that horrible things happen there.
Instead of being celebratory that they did not find any human remains, he seems almost disappointed that his assumptions were wrong. And the supposed unmarked graves that were originally discovered at Kamloops has been revealed to not actually be graves as well.
The alleged grave site in Kamloops, it turns out, that we told you about at the beginning, that was the site of a septic field, which was used to dispose of the school's sewage. The school dug a massive line of trenches 3 feet deep for that purpose. But the researchers, quote unquote, who scanned the site with ground-penetrating radar somehow weren't aware of that. I mean, how could they miss that little detail? How could they fail to consider other potential reasons why a school might dig trenches? How was a mass grave the very first and only assumption? Remember, the radar never detected bodies. Okay, ground-penetrating radar can't do that. It detected anomalies. And anomaly just means something unexpected or strange, something out of place. Well, if there's something unexpected in the ground, something out of place, why would you assume that the thing must be a grave of dead children? Aren't there other possibilities you should consider first?
It's absolutely tragic that a false narrative has led to so many Christians suffering because of attacks upon their churches, Christians who themselves have not oppressed anyone. I don't doubt that many horrible things happened at these residential schools, but it seems that many people want the conditions to be as bad as they think they were in order to perpetuate the narrative that Christians are evil and deserve to be persecuted.
Leftist groups are. But Canada's leaders aren't condemning the burning of churches. No, they're endorsing the burning of churches. The head of the British Columbia Civil Liberties Association, a monster called Harsha Walia, tweeted this, quote, "Burn it all down." Then a close confidant of the Prime Minister of Canada, Justin Trudeau, a man called Gerald Butts, called the arson, and we're quoting now, understandable. A woman called Heidi Matthews, meanwhile, of Harvard Law School, described the attacks as, quote, the right of resistance to systemic injustice. burning churches.
2 more Catholic churches have been destroyed by fires in Canada. 2 churches were located in Indigenous communities in Western Canadian region of British Columbia. The incident follows the grim discoveries of nearly 1,000 unmarked graves at the former church-run Indigenous residential schools in the country.
People who question the validity of the existence of these supposed unmarked graves are labeled as denialists who refuse to accept the obvious truth. However, it would be extremely easy to prove the claims by actually uncovering human remains, but this is exactly what has not yet been done, which leads to the assumption that the narrative concerning unmarked graves is being perpetuated by the media in spite of growing evidence to the contrary.
One senior member of Parliament, Mark Miller, argued that Canadians who ask questions are, quote, part of a pattern of denialism and distortion. In other words, seeking verifiable evidence of the media's claims is somehow denialism. By asking to verify the facts, you are distorting the facts.
When Christians are attacked or persecuted, the elites in power and the mainstream media never defend them or call what is happening to them evil. Rather, they seem to celebrate and endorse this kind of behavior. Of course, as Christians, this kind of opposition to Christianity should not surprise us because we know that the world will hate us because of Jesus Christ.
If the world hates you, you know that it has hated me before it hated you. If you were of the world would love its own. But because you're not of the world, but I chose you out of the world, because of this the world hates you. Remember the word that I said to you, a slave is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they will also persecute you. If they kept my word, they will keep yours also. But all these things they will do to you for my name's sake, because they do not know the one who sent me.
Thank you so much for watching. If you like these videos and want to help support this channel, the best way to do it is to just watch these videos until the end and click the subscribe button. Thank you so much for your support and encouragement.